There is a letter, signed in Rome in June. It says no, and it says so in words that leave no room for misreading. 2 months later, the man to whom that letter was addressed spoke publicly. He spoke at length and calmly. He did not protest. He did not announce an appeal. He did something almost no one expected. He said thank you, and he added a sentence that many people, both inside and outside Germany, are still rereading today. The point of contention is a single one, and it can be stated simply. Who is permitted to ascend the pulpit and preach during Mass? For the Catholic Church, the answer has been the same for a very long time, and it is written directly into canon law. The homily is the responsibility of the priest or the deacon. The German bishops formally requested that this be changed, not universally, not for everyone, but specifically for cases defined as exceptional. If you like the video, join our channel membership. Also, hype the video. If you think it's informative, it keeps us motivated to work forward. The request landed on Vatican desks on March 30th of this year, and it did not arrive by ordinary channels. The president of the German Bishops' Conference personally carried it to Rome. On that same occasion, he delivered a second document as well, the Statutes of the future German Synodal Council, the permanent governing body born out of the Synodal Way. That second document still sits, undecided, on the dicastery's desk. The request itself is precise, and it is worth reading exactly as written. It asked for an indult, meaning a specific dispensation granted by the Apostolic See that goes beyond common law. The exact formula reads as follows: to allow, in exceptional circumstances, a duly appointed lay member of the faithful to preach in place of the homily during the celebration of the Eucharist. The request originated from one of the decisions formally approved through the German Synodal Way. This was not, in other words, the personal initiative of a single isolated bishop acting alone. The man who carried the document by hand is Betzing Wilmer, 65 years old, who has presided over the German Bishops' Conference since February of this year. In March, Leo XIV also entrusted him with pastoral care of the Diocese of Münster. Münster is not an ordinary diocese. It has the largest Catholic population of any diocese in all of Germany. Rome's response is dated June 17th, less than 3 months after the request was delivered. It is a letter from the Dicastery for Divine Worship and the Discipline of the Sacraments, addressed to him personally in his capacity as President of the Episcopal Conference, and the answer is no, without qualification or extenuating circumstances attached. The document does not simply deny the request. Choose a voice that resonates in 4 distinct steps, each worth examining in turn. The first step carries more weight than all the others combined, because it concerns the very nature of the rule the Germans were asking Rome to set aside. Rome writes that reserving the homily to the priest or deacon is not merely a disciplinary norm. And it immediately explains where that reservation actually comes from. It derives, the letter states, from the very nature of the liturgy itself. That distinction decides everything that follows. A disciplinary rule can, in principle, be dispensed with by proper authority. A rule arising from the nature of the thing itself cannot be dispensed with at all, regardless of the authority asking. This is precisely why the request could not be granted under any circumstances, and Rome is careful to clarify that this was not a matter of lacking pastoral goodwill toward the German bishop's underlying concern. The second point addresses what a homily actually is within the structure of the Mass. It is not a speech, it is not a reflection, it is not even a form of personal testimony. Rome recalls that the homily is an integral part of the liturgy of the Word, intrinsically linked to the proclamation of the gospel itself. It is, the letter states, the exercise of a teaching office specifically entrusted to ordained ministers through the sacrament of holy orders. The third passage contains the single most concise sentence in the entire Roman document, one worth hearing twice, because it holds the entire argument together in a single line. The proclamation of the Word within the liturgical celebration is inseparable from the mission received sacramentally. The letter continues that this proclamation is likewise inseparable from the unity binding Word and sacrament together within the Eucharistic celebration as a whole. Almost no news outlet picked up the fourth passage, and it is by far the most operationally significant of the four. Rome explicitly excludes the possibility of introducing into the Mass something functionally equivalent to a homily under a different name. It closes off that specific shortcut before anyone could attempt to take it. Calling it a reflection, a sharing, or a testimony, the letter states plainly, makes no difference whatsoever. The document does not end with a bare prohibition, however. It also recalls in detail what remains genuinely open to the laity. The Church, Rome notes, already entrusts many forms of preaching and proclamation of the Word to lay Catholics today under one specific and non-negotiable condition. These must take place outside the homily and outside the celebration of the Eucharist itself. Everything else, the letter states, is already largely permitted. Finally, the letter asks the bishops to ensure the ongoing formation of ordained ministers, on the reasoning that the actual pastoral problem lies not in who is speaking, but in how the preaching itself is being done. Vatican News published the response on June 23rd. The story spread across the Catholic world within hours. In Germany, a reaction followed within 24 hours, and it was not at all what one might have expected, following a written and unambiguous refusal. The Central Committee of German Catholics, the country's large lay governing body, immediately demanded that the matter not be considered closed and called on the bishops to return to negotiations with Rome on a point Rome itself had just explicitly declared to be non-disciplinary in nature. On August 15th, Bishop Peter Kohlgraf of Mainz spoke publicly. He openly acknowledged that lay people could not, under current law, preach during Mass. But then he added something that has since circulated widely across Catholic websites. He said he would not penalize anyone who continued to do so anyway. Then comes August 21st. The president of the German bishops gave a lengthy interview to a diocesan weekly. He was asked directly what would now happen to the pastoral workers of his own diocese following Rome's refusal. He did not answer immediately and opened instead with an observation. He said he was still new to Münster, but that he knew exactly how things stood there. I know that in our diocese many baptized men and women have been dealing with this issue for many years, and a culture has developed. Then came the sentence, everyone is still rereading. Referring specifically to a practice Rome had explicitly banned only 2 months earlier, he said, I have great respect for this tradition that has grown, and I feel profound gratitude. In that same interview, Betzing also stated plainly that he respects Rome's response. That specific line deserves to be quoted in full precisely because he did actually say it, and fairness requires including it alongside everything else he said. But nowhere in that same interview did he announce any disciplinary measure, even in principle, against those in his diocese who continue the practice Rome has just explicitly ruled out. And nowhere does he state that anything in Münster will actually change as a result of Rome's letter. On the contrary, he said, I firmly believe that the excellent pastoral workers of our diocese will find a good way to adequately address the circumstances. He was then asked about women, sexual morality, celibacy, and lay participation in church governance, the broader cluster of issues that have defined the German synodal way since its inception. His answer came in 5 words: "The issues are not closed." He added, without hedging, that work on them continues. It is worth being honest about the real and measurable problem sitting underneath the German position, because it is not merely an ideological talking point, and treating it as one would be unfair to the actual pastoral situation on the ground. In many regions of Germany, parishes have gone years without a resident priest. Pastoral workers, often lay people with genuine theological formation and years of direct service to their communities, are frequently the people actually holding parish life together in the priest's absence. Those who support the German bishop's position ask a pointed and legitimate question: can a community effectively led, week to week, by a layperson genuinely fall silent at the one moment, the homily, when the community is gathered specifically to be taught and formed in the faith? Those who support Rome's position respond that the underlying problem is real and serious, but that the specific remedy proposed, altering who may preach within the Mass itself, is not the correct solution, because it touches something Rome's own letter describes as belonging to the very nature of the liturgy rather than to its disciplinary scaffolding. And Rome's document, they point out, does not leave this pastoral need unaddressed. It explicitly directs that path elsewhere. Preaching, yes, and in abundance, but outside the Mass itself. From this point forward, the story can be followed with an actual calendar in hand, and verified independently rather than taken on anyone's word, including this channel's own. In the autumn, the president of the German bishops will be in Linz, meeting with theologians and European representatives to continue discussing these same underlying issues. In October, he will be in Rome for 8 consecutive days, joined there by every president of every episcopal conference in the world, convened directly by the Pope. And the statutes of the German Synodal Council, delivered to Rome back in March and still sitting undecided on the dicastery's desk, remain exactly where they were left. If the practice in Münster has genuinely changed by the time October concludes, that will be one answer. If it has remained exactly as it is today, that will be another, and either outcome will tell us something concrete about how seriously Rome's June letter is actually being received on the ground, rather than simply in the words offered to a diocesan newspaper. It's worth stepping back here and placing this story alongside the broader pattern this channel has already documented extensively across multiple episodes this year, because Betzing's specific response is not an isolated case of diplomatic phrasing. It follows a recognizable shape this channel has now traced repeatedly, from Cardinal Roche's confident public assurances that Traditionis Custodes will remain untouched, standing directly alongside Archbishop Cordileone's equally confident public doubt about whether Roche actually speaks for the Pope's own mind, to Bishop Eleganti's carefully worded letter naming a decades-long pattern of institutional drift while stopping short of open confrontation, to Bishop Mozart's letter measuring the synod against its actual fruits rather than its stated intentions. In each of these cases, this channel has documented a specific and recurring dynamic. A formal, written, and doctrinally grounded position issued by Rome met not with open defiance, which would at least be unambiguous, but with a kind of respectful and gracious non-compliance, an acknowledgement of the letter's authority combined with a quiet continuation of the exact practice that letter was written to end. Betzing's interview fits this pattern almost perfectly. and it deserves to be examined with the same care this channel has applied to every other example of it. He does not dispute Rome's authority to issue the ruling. He does not argue that the dicastery for divine worship lacked competence to answer the German bishop's request. He explicitly states that he respects the response. And yet the concrete and practical effect of his own words, spoken as the diocesan bishop with direct authority over Münster itself, is that nothing changes there. The tradition that has grown, his own phrase for the exact practice Rome's letter names and excludes, receives his personal gratitude rather than his correction. This is worth sitting with specifically because Rome's own letter, examined carefully in Part 1, anticipated almost exactly this kind of response and tried to close it off in advance. Recall the fourth of the 4 points, the one this channel noted almost no news outlet actually reported on. Rome explicitly excluded the possibility of introducing something functionally equivalent to a homily under a different name. Reflection, sharing, testimony, whatever label might be applied to it. That specific clause exists precisely because Rome's own drafters evidently anticipated that a flat prohibition on the word homily might simply produce a semantic workaround rather than an actual change in practice. What Betzing's own interview suggests, though he never states it this directly himself, is that the workaround may not even require a change in vocabulary at all. It may simply require continued practice, described afterward not as defiance but as tradition, met with gratitude rather than correction, by the one bishop with direct jurisdiction to actually enforce Rome's own ruling within his own diocese. There is a structural observation worth making here as well, one this channel has already applied in earlier coverage of the American traditional mass disputes in Pittsburgh and San Angelo. Rome's disciplinary authority, however clearly and forcefully articulated in a letter like this one, ultimately depends for its practical effect on the willingness of individual diocesan bishops to actually implement it on the ground. A letter from a Roman dicastery, however theologically precise and however carefully reasoned, does not enforce itself. It requires a bishop in his own diocese choosing to apply it. What this story demonstrates, alongside the American liturgical cases this channel has already documented extensively, is that this specific point of dependency, the gap between what Rome writes and what an individual bishop chooses to do about it in practice, currently runs in both directions simultaneously across the universal church. In Pittsburgh, that gap was used to close a permission Rome's own document, Traditionis Custodes, technically allowed to lapse. In San Angelo, that same structural gap was used to open a new Mass Rome's document, did not require, but also did not forbid. And now in Münster, that identical structural gap appears to be functioning, to preserve a practice Rome has explicitly and directly forbidden. This is not, on its own, evidence of any coordinated resistance or organized defiance. Nothing in Betzing's own words suggests deliberate confrontation with Roman authority, and it would be unfair to characterize his interview that way. What it does suggest, when placed honestly alongside every other example this channel has documented this year, is something considerably more structural and, in its own way, more consequential than any single act of defiance could be. That the practical governance of the Universal Catholic Church currently depends, to a degree many ordinary Catholics may not fully appreciate, on the individual and highly variable discretion of diocesan bishops applying Rome's own rulings with wildly different degrees of actual compliance, whether the specific question at hand concerns who may preach at the Ambo in Münster, who may celebrate the 1962 Missal in Pittsburgh, or who may attend a Mass celebrated by a society priest in Fort Worth. Betzing's closing line in that interview, the issues are not closed, deserves to be read in that same light. He is not describing a single unresolved dispute over lay preaching in isolation. He is describing an entire cluster of questions: women's roles, sexual morality, celibacy, lay participation in church governance, that the German synodal way raised together as a connected set, and that remain, in his own explicit words, still actively under discussion, regardless of what any individual Roman dicastery has ruled on any individual piece of that broader set. The statutes for the German Synodal Council, delivered to Rome the same day as the preaching request, and still sitting undecided months later, are the clearest evidence that this broader and more consequential negotiation has not actually concluded, whatever the outcome of this one specific and narrower ruling on preaching turned out to be. What October will actually reveal, when the presidents of every episcopal conference in the world gather in Rome for 8 consecutive days with the Pope himself, is not simply whether Betzing personally changes his own stated position. It is whether Rome, having issued a letter this theologically precise and this carefully reasoned on one narrow but doctrinally significant point, possesses the institutional will and the practical mechanisms to ensure that letter actually governs practice in the diocese of the very man who received it. President of the entire National Episcopal Conference, currently serving as ordinary of the largest Catholic diocese in the country that produced this exact request in the first place. If Münster's practice has genuinely changed by then, that will be a real and verifiable answer. If it has not, that too will be an answer, and arguably the more consequential one, because it will tell every other diocesan bishop watching this specific case exactly how much practical weight a letter from a Roman dicastery actually carries when the bishop receiving it simply chooses, courteously and without open confrontation, to continue as before. What do you think? Leave a comment below. Amen. God bless you.